Hey guys, this is the recording for week 1, day 2 of biology. We're going to be talking about the scientific method today. This is one of the handouts you have access to on Google Classroom. When you hyperlink in, this is the page that will appear in CK12 with some information about the scientific method. Scientific method may also be called a research method, scientific process, research process. Pretty much depends on who your instructor is and what materials they're using or what textbook they're referring to. But it's pretty much the same methodology, no matter what it's called. It is a way to solve problems in an orderly fashion that if someone disagrees with your results, they can go back through your experiment. And if they do the same exact steps that you've written down correctly, they should be able to get the same results to prove your experimental results. So, we're going to be talking about some of the terminology involved with the scientific method, as well as some examples of that particular process. So here is kind of a general outline of some of the steps in the scientific method. Some professors or instructors will add some different terms, maybe use a different term, but it's pretty much the same process. If you look at the worksheet versus the steps here, I have a few more things in there to kind of go into more detail for you. So basically, if someone's going to do an investigation, it's probably because they have a question about something. They've seen something, they've heard something, and they're curious about it. So, hearing, seeing, smelling, those are all examples of observations that one can make. And when you observe something that you're not sure of, it's probably going to lead to a question like, why is that happening? What causes that to happen? How does that happen? And so in some of the books or descriptions, after you ask a question, it suggests that you do some research. So with the internet so readily available, if you have a question about something, it's real easy to Google and get some information. Now you have to be careful about what websites you're using. They need to be, research-based type websites for this kind of information. So you'll ask a question, why is this happening? And then as part of the research method, you form a statement called a hypothesis. And another phrase they use to describe a hypothesis is a testable question, which means that when you run a test or an experiment, you're able to say, yes, my guess was correct, or no, my guess was incorrect as to why something was happening. Now, just because you do the experiment and your results do not agree with what you thought was going to happen does not mean that your experiment was bad or your research process was bad. It just means that you anticipated one answer and something else actually happened, which still is valuable because it gives you more information. Now, when I have you write a hypothesis, I'm kind of old school here, so I'm going to have you write it the way we have written them for a long time, and that is to use two words in that statement. The terms are if, and the second term is then. So you'll hear me call it an if-then format. So how that works would be, as an example, if I'm going to set up an experiment to show that water is needed to make seeds germinate, then I would have something like, if 4 cups of soil are each planted with seeds, then the cup that receives water will cause that seed to germinate. So there's the if, because there's a difference, only 1 cup is getting water, the other 3 are not. Then I made the prediction that the one with water, the seed would germinate. If I do this, then this will happen, okay? So after you form the hypothesis, between forming the hypothesis and testing the hypothesis, the test of the hypothesis is actually the experiment. Sometimes you have to design an experiment. At this stage, most of the time, in like your first year of college, like a beginning science class at college, they will give you a lab and the experiment's kind of laid out for you. Some of your more advanced college classes, they might ask you to design one. But for the initial beginning ones, they usually have kind of a format of what they want you to do, and you have to perform the experiment to get the results. And there's value in that because you learn about the equipment in science and you learn some of the skills that are needed when doing experiments. So, when you're testing the hypothesis, generally you're doing some type of experiment. Now, people use this format, you know, when it comes to psychology, when it comes to medicine, physics, biology. This format is followed through all kinds of different subject areas. And so sometimes one of these steps may be left out. Depends on what's going on in the experiment. But like I said, these are the general steps that you would follow. So I'm going to switch over here for a little bit. When you design an experiment, there are different parts of the experiment. And the scientific terms are independent variable and dependent variable. And there's different little mnemonic devices or tricks that we try to teach students to keep these separate. For the longest time, I would say that the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. And then I heard another phrase where someone said, the independent variable is what I can change. I can change this, and the result of that change is the dependent variable. So this is what we're testing. This is the result. So in that experiment I talked about before, the independent variable could be whether the plants get water or not, or the seeds get water or not. And what depends on the water would be the growth of the plant. So what I can change is the amount of water. What depends on the water is the growth of the plant. That's your dependent variable. And then some experiments will have what's called a control. It's kind of like what normally happens, what you can compare the experimental factor to see if it makes a difference. And something else I don't have in here. Let me add another term here. There are some things that we call constants. So in terms of the seed experiment, some constants would be, well, you'd want to use the same kind of seed because different seeds takes different days or times to germinate. So you want to use the same type of seed. You'd also want to make sure that all the seeds are planted in the same type of soil. They're in the same size container. The containers are all at the same temperature. They're all receiving the same amount of light. Those are all constants because then when you eliminate all of the other things that could affect the experiment, it comes down to, do the seeds need water or not to germinate? So those are constants. And once you start that experiment, the next thing is to record your observations and data. What's happening here? So for an experiment like that, you would probably have a calendar or you would have a chart and you would put down the day you planted the seeds, how much water you put there and or gave them. And then you would start marking off how long it takes before you saw the seeds start to germinate. Okay. Then you would decide, after you gathered this data, whether or not the seeds required water to germinate. You're drawing conclusions. And formally, when you draw a conclusion, you're going to, at this point, either accept your hypothesis or reject your hypothesis. So if you put down that if seeds are planted and only 1 cup receives water, then the seeds with water will germinate. And if they did, you would accept that hypothesis, and you would write something like, I accept my hypothesis that the seeds planted which received water would germinate. Or if you said that the seeds without water would germinate and they didn't grow, then you would have to write in your conclusion, I reject my hypothesis that when seeds do not have water that they would grow, because they didn't grow. Okay, so over here goes through more of the vocabulary. Okay, so here they're talking about this moth. Okay, and they're talking about the spots on the wings. And a question that might be like, the spots on this, we're talking about the spots on this moth's wings looking like an owl. So it could be like, what reason might there be for the moth to have spots on its wings that look like an owl? Then you'd form the hypothesis. Hypothesis is a possible answer to a scientific question, but it just isn't any answer. It must be based on scientific knowledge. It must be logical. It must be falsifiable, which means testable. You're either going to say it's correct or it's incorrect when you get done with your experiment. Okay. Testing the hypothesis. You'll need to make a prediction based on the hypothesis. A prediction is a statement that tells what will happen under certain conditions. It can be expressed in the form of, if A occurs, then B will happen. Based on your hypothesis, you might make this prediction. If a moth has eye spots on its wings, then the birds will avoid eating it. Okay. And then you must gather evidence to test your prediction. Evidence is any type of data that may either agree or disagree with a prediction. So it may either support or disprove a hypothesis. Evidence may be gathered by an experiment, which assumes that you gather evidence by making more observations of moth with eye spots. Okay. Perhaps you observe that birds really do avoid eating moths with eye spots. This evidence agrees with your prediction. Now, this would be a hard one to test out in the wild. That's why I talked about the seeds. And this prediction, that's kind of the same format that you use when you write a hypothesis. Okay. And then they talk here about the experiment. They talk about drawing your conclusions. And then another step is communicating results, which is sharing with the scientific community what you've learned. Okay. And a lot of times that's in terms of a research paper, or you may have results published online. Used to be published in magazines, but we don't have many of those anymore. Okay. All right. So here's a video over the scientific method. When you hyperlink in, you can actually watch these videos. Here's some more that are kind of interesting. Several of them there. Now, another link that I have for you, let me move over here, is, let me see if this will bring it. Yep, here it is. I've actually added this one and two on your link in Classroom. This is another, oh, that's not it. That's a game you can take. You can practice with it. I thought it was my handout. There it is. So right here, it talks about the big picture. Science aims to gain knowledge about the natural world. The very word science comes from the Latin word scientia, meaning knowledge. Scientists ask questions and use logic and evidence to answer the questions. They test these possible answers by conducting experiments that test for hypotheses under controlled conditions. When experiments are not possible, scientists use models and natural studies to test their hypothesis. Hypotheses that have been tested multiple times and accepted as facts become theories. So here's some of the terminology. which you can use to answer the study guide over here. Ask questions. You can just give me an example, form a hypothesis, possible answer to a question, experiment, a special type of scientific investigation. There's the definition for dependent, independent variable. And then also the control. Let me help you out with that one. It is what we compare the results to. And then the constants are what remains the same for the experiment. Okay. This here could be in the form of charts and graphs, sometimes called data tables. It's however you record your information. Draw your conclusions. That is where you're going to either accept or reject hypothesis, okay? And I've kind of talked to you about communicating results. So I'm going to let you all work through this particular assignment, study guide. I'm going to reduce that. So what you have here in Classroom, if you scroll down through this here, that's the same thing as the hyperlink for CK12. I'm going to go back, and then right here is a practice scientific method worksheet. And I want you to go through and fill this out, these types of questions, based upon this lab I'm describing right here. So that's due by Friday. This is due by Friday. I would have these done before Friday because I'm probably going to go over them with you on Wednesday. We have to have an assessment on Thursday. So it would be to your benefit to have this done. And then also, don't forget, that's also pushed out on Classroom, is the week 1, day 2 attendance assignment. And it's reviewing some of the stuff from Monday. So make sure you get that turned in by 11:59 on Tuesday. And also remember, you can contact me through Google Hangouts. You can contact me through my email. Some people have been posting questions in Stream on Google Classroom. I tried tonight to do 2 Zoom meetings with my health class, and they were not successful where the people couldn't log in. So I'm going to have to figure out how to launch those. And I'm thinking I might try doing some Zoom meetings for tutoring or to help people if they need help for reviewing for some of the tests and so forth. And what else? There's something else I was going to tell you all. Be sure and do your daily assignments. That's important. You need to study because we will have a weekly assessment on Thursday, and everything has to be turned in for the week by Friday at 1. So don't procrastinate. I know it's easy to do. There's a lot going on with everybody being home. It's hard to get stuff done. So just stay in contact. And this is the video for week 1, day 2, part A. Okay. I may have a subsequent video to follow. Actually, there'll be just the one for today. Remember, like on some of the posts, I may have an A and B video since this is a 2-hour class, but this is quite a bit for y'all to get done for Wednesday. All right. Talk to you soon. Thanks.